Hey guys, so we are beginning your digital essay, and this is a presentation I'd intended to give in class, but will be available online. You will need your notebook as you're going through this presentation. We'll be looking at some examples of digital essays, going through the assignment details, and also going through some of the things that you'll need to be brainstorming in order to kind of be thinking through what you want your digital essay to be about. So there will be some brainstorming and some writing and hopefully some notes as you're moving through. So you're welcome to pause and pick up where you need to. You'll be taking your responses and notes from this presentation and moving them into the next activity, which will be your thought letter, which you can find on the calendar. The first thing I'm going to do is, so I can adjust this a little bit, is you should be looking at my version of the Canvas page. And I'm going to show you where you should be able to scroll down, adjust the screen here, to assignment detail, or sorry, assignment sheets. If you scroll down to the bottom of the Canvas page, you would see assignment sheets, and then you would see where you can find the inquiry project. You can access the digital essay from here, or you can go to the inquiry project page, and there are several places that link you to the digital essay from there. In the presentation that I'm going to go through, what I'll be doing is going over some of these major kind of requirements and overviewing. As you go through, you'll notice what's on here is things about digital essays and multimodality, intertextuality, some of the color, balance, design things that we have not yet gotten to but will, and then some of the other design tools that are here. We're going to be going through just some of the highlights in terms of what you need just to kind of get started. Okay, so I'm going to go back. You're welcome. You're going to be prompted to go through this assignment sheet and answer some questions about it, and we'll go over some of the design things and some of those other things that we haven't gotten to yet, kind of as we move through the digital essay. For this presentation, where we're going to be is just kind of talking about the gist. So first, digital essays are designed to be read on the screen. For instance, if you were to write an essay in a Google Doc and you copied and pasted it into your digital essay page on Canvas, on Wix, that would not be a digital essay because it has not been enhanced using affordances on the web. We've talked about affordances already, and we've talked about using all 5 modes to support the text. So we're not just looking at a print essay. We're thinking about how visual mode, space, digital tools, all of those things are going to be helping support the text, and you'll be able to see that kind of as we move through some of these examples. So you can come back to these on your own time. I just sort of have 8 different examples of visual examples of digital essays, and I pull up each one, and under each I just sort of explained or made a couple of points about the specific design of that essay, and I've had lots of good ones. Some of these we'll look at in terms of like good and bad things for design later, but for each of these, the reason why I picked it is because they're very different, and it just gives you an idea of what a digital essay could look like. So the first one, we have looked at this before. You will remember this. We have looked at this as a website example, as a writing theory example. We've gone through this. This was designed to look like a magazine, using more of the print elements of using the columns and things like that. But you'll notice this is digitally enhanced. There are sections, titles, visuals, hyperlinks, columns. This would not be exactly the same if it were just a print essay. So the design, the visuals, everything is supporting what's happening here. I'm going to go on to this one. This one will maybe shock you a little bit. The topic here was horror films. Yeah, so it's a very media-based topic, and it is designed as a digitally enhanced academic essay. So it's written as a standard essay but very enhanced, very very visual. So you can kind of see how it helps create, how the design can help create a tone and a support for what you're talking about. I'm going to look at the next one. I like this one because the way it's designed uses elements of a web page or a web article, and it's very visual. You can see the topic was Health Geography, a Global Pandemic, and it's designed very much with visual mapping elements that really worked to help navigate through this issue. Let's see. This is one I've shown you before. It was the winner, I believe last year or the year before, for the inquiry writing category. The topic is obviously children's literature, and she used a lot of design elements as if it were kind of a digital book. You can flip through the pages, and each page sort of moves through a different topic. She did play with it a little bit. Again, with the way some of these look, it doesn't have to be a completely set genre. She used digital book elements, but also some web page elements. It's non-linear, meaning it just doesn't just go from top to bottom. You can kind of navigate through some different pages. This example is also non-linear. And if you've done a lot of reading online, you've noticed that a lot of things online are non-linear. If you read a print essay, it goes top to bottom. A lot of times when you're online, you're welcome to click on links, look at different pages, kind of self-navigate. For this particular issue, it was less controversial, less known about, very formally written about, and that made it really easy to let the reader navigate through different parts of the essay. It doesn't just go from top to bottom. You're welcome to kind of jump around, self-navigate. You are kind of prompted to move from one to the other, but again, this type of design can work really well for certain types of issues. This one is also kind of a web article or a web page. These types of pages are great for arguments where you're trying to raise awareness. So this one was human trafficking. She was able to keep a very appropriate tone by using a lot of, especially like digital writing techniques, like lists, blocks, using a lot of nonlinear elements. I think showing you this before and saying blocks, she used just these different spaces to tell specific stories and firsthand accounts. And again, it's very professionally done and kept an appropriate tone. Let's look at this one. This one looks really different because it also does the magazine sort of theme, but the topic was fashion, and she did a really nice job pulling some of the features. You'll notice the larger first letter of the paragraph, some of the way the images and the page flow work really good or it's another option for if you're wanting something to look more like a magazine. You have to pay attention sometimes. Actually, you can't see my face very well. I'm going to go back. You have to pay attention to what design and what visual elements are going to be more helpful for your reader and what kind of argument you're going to be making, which is something we're going to talk about as we're kind of moving through and planning your essay. Let's look at, I think, one more. And this is just a kind of more of a just digitally enhanced academic essay. The color scheme was chosen because of the topic. It's very, very professional, and you can kind of see how everything looks. This was one from a long time ago, so it's a little bit shorter. We were doing kind of a different kind of assignment, but it is an example of a digital essay. And again, these are always visual examples of ideas for how things could look, sound, read, not to specifically take requirements from. But I picked all of these to show because they do all look very different, and just to give you some ideas that digital essays can look very different. from each other. Some are inspired by magazine elements. Some are inspired by news elements, web pages. Some really do just kind of play with it as a web page and make it very, very visually enhanced. Sometimes very, very non-linear. It does give you a lot of opportunity to take some ownership of what you want to do and figure out what is going to be most helpful for your audience, what's going to be most appropriate for the issue that you're writing about, and make some of those choices yourself. Which brings me to the rhetorical situation. In this assignment, you are picking that kind of for yourself. Whereas when we did the annotated bib, it was very structured and very kind of given to you. The digital essay is not like that. We are sort of kind of playing with the fact that the choices that you make have real consequences on the writing, on how the text comes out, making it, we said writing in class is simulated, but making it as real world as possible and giving you a lot of flexibility to make these choices for yourself. Figuring out how you want to use sources, design, choices about your own content, your own audience, your own purpose, and really kind of play with that. So kind of thinking also about purpose and audience, about really taking this beyond just thinking about me as the reader, but putting it on a website, modeling after real digital genres, and thinking about a potential bigger audience. We have to think about context with this also. I'm going to kind of skip down a little bit. This is not the audience of your annotated bibliography. The annotated bibliography was designed primarily to help you research, but in terms of the audience, the goal for the annotated bib is to provide a well-rounded look at the issue and list of resources for another researcher. You will choose a new audience. You won't be able to assume that they have done your research, know what's in your annotated bibliography, have access to it. This is a new text, new audience. We're going to be working on a whole lot of different things with the digital essay because there is a lot of choices to make. We'll be talking a lot about writing situations and your ownership and being able to explain what choices you make. Why this genre, why this audience, why this point, why are you organizing it this way, why are you using these sources, and really getting into the thinking behind your essay, thinking about the difference between academic arguments and popular arguments, and how to balance subjective versus objective writing, which I kind of have over here. How to think about purposeful organization strategies, figuring out what kinds of sources to use. We talked about primary, secondary, and tertiary, how they can be used different ways. So thinking about ways to use sources, synthesize, use strategies to communicate well with your audience, use digital tools, address other perspectives, all kinds of super fun stuff I know you're going to enjoy. So the next thing is just going through some of the basic assignment requirements. Okay, so first, this must, I can't stress this enough, please write it down. This has to be an argument, okay? You have to come up with a solid, identifiable point that's designed for a target audience. It must be designed to be persuasive, to be your point that you want to make about this issue. How can you write into this conversation? It does not have to answer your original question. That question was a big jumping off point. It helped you get a lot of well-rounded information about the issue. At the end of that research, your goal is to find your place in the conversation and something to say. So you may use slightly different sources. You may go find new things. You may use what's in your annotated bib, but there is some wiggle room there because, again, new text, new purpose, new audience. So you do have some options there. It must be an argument, though. There is, I guess, the habit of wanting to say, I just want to lay the information out and let the audience decide. But that doesn't take any real communication skill. It doesn't require any rhetorical choices. It doesn't require any synthesis of sources. And even those sort of objective reports, in a way, you're still selecting what you want the audience to see. So it doesn't necessarily fulfill what we are doing. So it must be an argument, okay? You do have some limitations with genre. It does have to be digital. The word essay is open to interpretation. So again, we looked at a lot of different ways that this could look, and you're welcome to throw out new ideas. I always get a little bit different things from people every semester, which is always fun to see. Some of the other requirements does need to be 2,500 words. We've kind of talked about that before. This does include captions for images and videos that you will include. It does include headings for your sections, those sort of subtitles. You're welcome to look at examples for that. All of the essay examples show what it means to have your essay split up into different sections with headings. You are required, let me back up just a little bit. That does not include your works cited section. You are required, just the way any digital text would, the essay itself and then the list of sources that are specifically referenced at the end. The works cited section is not your annotated bibliography. You must have a list of sources just referenced within the digital essay, okay? You also have to have body sections. You cannot write a straight essay that is not divided. One of the reasons that I require the sections is because nearly all really well developed and organized researched texts have them. Look at your scholarly articles. There are sections with titles that tell you what question that section addresses or what the goal of that section is. So for scholarly articles, it's methods, discussion, results. Like it tells you what the focus of that section is. We are doing the same thing. It also prompts ways of thinking about purposefully organizing much longer texts. I find that a lot of people who really struggle developing long essays, it's because they're not really thinking about what the different parts of their essay are. And once you have these sections, even if you took the titles out, it prompts a much more well organized and clear and fluid essay. So it's also practicing like help and ways of thinking about writing some of these like much longer research texts. So for these sections, they must be arranged with a purpose. So you should be able to tell me, explain the order that you put things in and why. They should focus on different parts of your argument. The reason is sometimes we will try to organize by doing like here's background, you should have things are organized around like either this is background, this is refuting a certain point, this is my solution. What people kind of struggle with is wanting to organize things around a certain source, like this section is about this TED Talk. Well, we already did that. That's how the annotated bibliography is organized, information about individual sources. That doesn't really bring sources together to make a point. You want to think about your section needing to address a question, be about a certain point, have a focus and a reason for being there that your reader can pick out. Think about it like a mini essay. This section serves a purpose within the bigger argument. It uses several sources and is well developed in and of itself. A section is usually several paragraphs long. So you do want to think about making them around, just designing them around certain points, certain things you want that section to do. And I also said this, do not organize around just source types or types of information. I kind of explained already why not source types, but the types of information, an example of that would be having a section about statistics or a section about studies. Well, statistics they're just pieces of information. They can often find very different things or show very different things. Studies, again, like they could contradict each other. The type of information doesn't necessarily lend itself to making a point, and you may have lots of statistics in that section that don't come together to make a point. It often is very problematic. People try to organize around a type of information rather than the point they want to make. And don't panic about that. We will, practice. You can, look at examples. We'll kind of talk about it as we move through the digital essay. For research requirements, you can use any information from previous assignments. Same thing with the annotated bib. Anything we've done, anything you found, annotated bib, studio work, whatever it is, you can use it. You can get new information, whatever you need, new text, new audience. You must include a minimum of 10 different sources to make your point. I'm going to explain a little bit about what I mean by 10 sources. Decoration does not count. If you have a video, like a TED Talk, a news clip, anything, just having it doesn't mean it's a source. It has to support the written mode. It has to support the text itself. That means you have talked about that video or that image inside the text. You have used it in the writing, okay, in order for it to be a source. If you drop a graph in there, that's cool. It's not a source until you write about it, until you tell us why it's there. Sources can be used in different ways. So it doesn't just mean you need 10 different sources for evidence. Remember, we said sources can be used, if you're using primary sources, they can be used to illustrate problems. An essay about video games would probably include and discuss examples of video games and show images and clips, and those things also count as sources. So you can also kind of think about that as a way to think about how you're selecting and using your sources. And a well-rounded essay will have primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. You should think about using multiple types of information. We've covered the reason for that. Different types of information show different things and come at it from different angles. If you only have studies, you're only hearing from an academic voice. So you want to kind of think about some variety. And then, of course, you are going to cite all of your sources with hyperlinks, by giving context for sources used, by using signal phrases, using bibliographic citations at the end. So these are things we're going to be practicing as well. Design requirements. You're required to use digital tools and affordances. There's that word affordance again. You can use images to illustrate ideas, reflect points, help set an appropriate tone. A lot of times people will use images just to illustrate what that section is about, or to reinforce a point. You can use videos to help illustrate ideas. So for instance, if you're talking about a certain event, showing a clip of a newscast explaining that event or a clip of that event could be really helpful. Hyperlinks to sources and other reading, so linking us not just to sources, but linking us out from your source, or out from your essay to other reading. Tertiary sources, news, places to get other information. Infographics. Again, infographics are great visuals to help us visualize data, and you're going to include those infographics, and then you're going to explain how to read them. Purposeful design choices, which we'll practice as we move through. The next part of this is explaining a little bit about academic argument, the kind of argument that we're going to be doing. The first thing I want to cover is a couple of characteristics of a specifically academic argument. One is that there are for scholars by scholars. If you are writing in a scholarly community, whether it's a freshman writing class or in a PhD program or for a peer-reviewed journal, the assumption is that you are either fluid with or that you are practicing and have respect for the conventions of that genre. So how academics will cite the tone for that specific genre, the research standards, all of those things. Opinions are situated in conversations and a nuanced understanding. Your writing should show and illustrate the research that you've done and the knowledge that you have on the issue, and your reader will expect that. Opinions and claims are logical and grounded in evidence. We will kind of cover this also later as we get closer to putting sources into the digital essay. We'll talk about logic and different ways of using evidence, but you shouldn't have opinions that aren't supported by anything, which also helps with having your essay not be overly emotional or biased. Composition should offer something new, so you should be seeking to write into the conversation in some way and push it forward, whether it's your own spin, a new solution, your unique way of presenting it. Your goal should be for the reader to understand your perspective on the issue and to push it forward, not just to lay stuff out and write a report. Arguments are fair. So when you're thinking about popular argument, the way we typically think about argument is popular argument, like people yelling back and forth, lawyers in a courtroom, persuasive commercials, where the goal is to argue to win at all costs. Maybe you automatically think of people arguing on Facebook. The goal there is always to argue to win when you're on the internet. The difference is that when you're in an academic setting, the goal is not to argue. The goal is to be in conversation. It is not to argue, to cherry pick or leave out information, or be biased and overly emotional. It is to push the conversation forward. It is to present your interpretation of the research that you've done, your interpretation of the data, so that someone can write back. It is about the slow-moving conversation, the back and forth, and the give and take, not arguing to win at all costs. So that is one sort of distinction, is that you can write an argument that is an unbiased argument. Not that it won't have what we consider bias with a little b, what everybody has, but the goal is for it to not have any bias with a big B. The over use of emotion, leaving out other perspectives, not being fair to other perspectives, academics, and those peer-reviewed articles that you read, those make arguments. Those look at data and interpret data. That's still an argument. And you want to think about that being the goal. The goal is not to argue to win. The goal is to present what you see. And the reader can do with that what they will. Okay, but there is kind of a distinction there. One of the things that we will talk about more is the ability to write an academic argument that is not biased. An argument that balances subjectivity with objectivity. An argument that does include opinions, but those opinions are interpretations of evidence and data that you've included, and are not opinions that are just being offered because that's how you feel about the issue. And that actually does take practice. Often we think we're being unbiased when we aren't, and sometimes that's down to a question that we've asked or a way that we've worded something. So a lot of staying away from bias in academic arguments is a trick of the wording. Even those peer-reviewed articles that we read offer arguments. They draw conclusions from data, but those conclusions are drawn from data, and that's a big kind of distinction. A couple of tips that we're gonna try to follow are: one, avoid overly emotional language and wording. Avoid absolute statements like they always do this, this is always true, this never happens, because those are extreme and often reveal an emotional investment and often reveal bias. Address other perspectives and describe them fairly, again in a way that doesn't reveal a bias. You should be able to do both of these things. Consider where the other side makes good points. If the other side has a valid concern, an idea, valid evidence, something understandable. If your own perspective has some problem areas within it, you should be able to live in that gray area and not have it be black and white. It's possible for valid concerns that oppose each other to exist in the same issue. If not, there wouldn't be much of a conversation to be had. So you do kind of have to think about how to be level-headed in how you're dealing with perspectives that differ from your own, and make sure that you are not being overly emotional in your language, in your wording, and that when you offer opinions, claims that are debatable, they're attached to data. And they make sense based on the data that you're providing, and that's how we're going to practice achieving an academic argument. And we're going to continue working on that. There are a lot of types of arguments. The trick is to figure out, or at least the first steps to planning are to figure out what you want to say, to identify what kind of argument you are making, and then to be able to use the type of argument that's there to help you figure out how you want to arrange it. The way you order and arrange your argument will be based on the kind of argument that it is and what's going to be most helpful for helping the reader see how you're interpreting the research that you've done. So we're going to move on to the brainstorming part. We've gone over at least an overview of some of the major assignment details. We've looked at some examples. We've gone through some key things about academic argument and the kind of writing that we're going to do and the way we're going to address the research. So we're going to do a little bit of brainstorming to help prepare you for that thought letter. So we're going to start by just kind of getting a sense of what you want to say. The first thing is I'm going to have you do a word vomit. Yes, another word vomit. Yes, in your notebook. Goal is to try to get at the first thoughts that you have. If I said, what do you want your essay to be about? What would you say? Even if you don't really know what the main point is you want to make, even if it's just, I know I want to talk about these things. I'm going to give you, this should be in your notebook. I say time yourself for 5 minutes or shoot for over half a page, something like that. Same rules, no stopping, no erasing, no repeating. I do have some sentences or some sentence starters you can kind of grab. I'm skeptical of, I believe, I disagree that, it was important to find out. Maybe you do have an idea for a solution. We could solve this problem by doing this. I changed my mind about, and other people might be concerned about this. I want to argue that. Whatever will help you kind of get an idea. The goal is to get as much as possible. So would like you to pause the video and do kind of a little bit of free writing to get your ideas together. So now that you have a little bit in your notebook, it's probably really messy. But I want you to just kind of skim over what you have and just take maybe a minute or two to underline anything that seems like it could be a good point. It could be a starting idea for an essay, like this could be a good idea for a focus. This kind of reflects the gist of what I want to say, or a potential argument, a point you'd like to make, any of those things. So I'd like you to pause and just take a few minutes to do that. So you may or may not, based on what you just wrote, have any idea what you want your essay to be about, but at least you've had a chance to toy with some ideas. And I want to answer a couple of other questions that or not really answer a couple of questions, but have you think about a couple of questions that you need to consider as you're sort of trying to get a big picture together, or at least start thinking about what the heck you might write about in this essay. The first one is just what kind of argument or arguments you're trying to make. With the brainstorming that you have, what I'd like you to do in your notebook is list and just make notes on a couple of ideas here. I'm going to go through 6 popular types of arguments. They all sort of have a different focus. They can all possibly be organized differently. What you may notice as I'm reading through them is that one of these or more may match something you just wrote about. you might have said, I think I want to talk about this, and you realize this kind of argument matches it. So what I'd like you to do is try to write that down. Where do you see this kind of argument sounding most like what you want to do? The first one is to make a claim of fact. This may sound kind of complicated. It's not actually this is a very popular kind of argument. If you want to argue that something is indeed true, or is indeed a problem, or is indeed a big deal, this is very much where arguments that raise awareness sort of fall in. If you would like a particular audience to believe that something is true or important, this is really what you're trying to accomplish, is arguing a claim of fact. The second one is, do you want to clear up a misconception? This is similar to a claim of fact, except the whole essay is focused on clearing up misconceptions. If you've ever been on the internet, you've seen those like myth busting kind of things, where it's like myth 1, why people believe this and the reason why it's not true. That's a misconception style argument where you are just focusing on listing, here are the things people believe are true, here are wrong ways of thinking or misunderstandings, and I want to clear all of them up. Do you want to show a correlation between two things? So my go-to at the beginning of the semester, when we're talking about like argument as a not argument, but writing as a conversation and research as a conversation, is the video games and violence. If I'm trying to show that there's a correlation between video game violence and violence in teens, that's showing a correlation, trying to find a connection. Do you want to persuade a particular audience to change their opinion about some aspect of this issue? The next one is close to that. Do you want to persuade a particular audience to change their behavior? So one is just kind of an opinion, like I want you to agree with me on this. Here's how I'm interpreting this issue. Here's my thinking. I want you to understand my thinking. This one, the second or the fifth one, is more of a call to action. Like I want you to vote for this person. I want you to become a vegan. I want you, it's something that you want people to do versus something you want people to think. Do you want to propose a policy change in order to solve a problem? So if you are wanting to critique a policy that we have in place, critique an idea for a new policy, this is a lot of times where people are kind of falling if they're talking about healthcare, political issues, specifically trying to address a current problem. A lot of times you're thinking about, this is what we're doing now, and I want to show why it's not working. Here's a problem we have and several solutions that are floating about, and I want to argue which one I support. I want to offer a new, solution to this problem. But any of those would kind of fall under that. There's lots of other kinds of arguments. These are the most common or the most popular. So I want you to just kind of look through those and think about which ones might match and kind of jot that down. Before we move on, I do want to clear up the thesis myth. The idea that the last statement of the opening paragraph must be your thesis statement. It can be. I mean, maybe. I mean, it can go there if you want it to. And I think we learned that from the 5-paragraph essay, but it can go other places, depending on the kind of argument that you want to make. And this is also just an example of how knowing the kind of argument that you're going to make can matter. If you're writing about an issue that is not controversial, and your audience, maybe you're raising awareness, your thesis statement can go in the beginning. And it might be a good place to put it. If you're doing something like a problem solution, I'm not going to explain Rogerian argument right now, but we'll get to it later. If you're trying to do a problem solution, your first part of your paper is probably going to be about trying to define that and describe that problem. And then the last part of the paper is the solution, and you'll probably start that second half of the paper with your thesis, with why this is the correct solution. And that would put your thesis statement in the middle of the paper. If you are talking about a controversial issue, your audience is possibly politically charged. For instance, you may not want to start with your opinion because your audience may feel very differently about it and you're going to lose them from the beginning. In that case, it might be better to start with a question, just that you want people to consider, because those are gestural while not being often combative. and appropriately vague. And you use the essay to continue to explain your thinking and lead your reader to the end of the essay where you're going to put your thesis statement. So beginning, middle, or end. It can go in any of those places. Other things you might need to figure out, or at least think about right now. One is audience. Who do you want to write it to? I want you to stop now and take a little bit of time in your notebook. You don't have to necessarily name a group of people. That's stereotypical. But you may want to throw out some aspects of your audience that you know are going to be important. At the beginning of the semester, when we talked about audience, we wrote down a whole bunch of characteristics, and we said not all of these will matter all the time, but sometimes the age of your audience matters, and you may be more addressing a certain age group, or their gender might matter. What they know about the issue usually always matters. If they have any specific political beliefs or opinions, that can matter. So maybe thinking about who could be a target audience. You must have a target audience. You cannot say my essay is to everyone, because then you are going to be writing the longest text that has ever been written if you are trying to address every single person in the whole world. Usually when we're thinking about that, we're thinking of a general audience, and every text has a general audience, but there should be specific people that you're sort of envisioning to be on the other side, that you're writing this paper to. You might also think about which audiences may benefit from what you're saying, who should hear your perspective, and that might also kind of help you decide. So just take a minute to put that in your notebook and kind of pause this. The second thing is background. I'm not going to have you write anything necessarily right now, but I do want to make a point, is that I think a lot of times when people are writing, there's this assumption that there should just be this background section with this blanket of information, and that's not necessarily true. The background that needs to be there is specifically the background that your reader needs, your audience needs, in order to be caught up with where you are and to understanding why this is a problem, or what the conversation is, or what the different solutions are you're going to talk about, or what certain terms mean if they need that. But it should not be just random information, and readers should still know when they're reading this background why they're reading it, like what you're doing with it, why they need to know it. So yes, provide information the reader doesn't know that they need, and yes, have a point. Your background section or sections should still have points. Your reader should know why they need to know these dates, these terms, these statistics, this information. Should not include random blanket information that your reader either already knows or won't need. And it shouldn't be, again, just without a point. A lot of times when we're writing background without a point, it ends up being choppy and not fluid, because again, some of it's there without any specific reason, so it doesn't connect together. So write with a point. You will need to think about other perspectives. So you do need to include other perspectives. Doing this is a way of building credibility to show that you are being fair and that you're well knowledged. I don't even know if well knowledged is something you can say. That you are knowledgeable in what you've been researching in the conversation makes you seem trustworthy. And it also kind of helps build your own argument to show that you've done the research on that. And we'll get into more about that in a minute. Genre, how might this look? We've talked about some of the options. You've looked at some examples. You might want to take a few minutes in your notebook to answer a couple of questions. One, which example stood out to you? Which ones do you remember thinking, that's kind of cool? Which ones do you remember thinking, I would never want to try to copy that? Maybe think about your target audience. Where would they most likely read your material? If you're writing to raise awareness, would a web page be the best option for your audience? If you're writing to moms, where are they most likely to read this material? Where can you put it in front of people? It may help you to also think about what the tone of your issue is. Again, if you're writing about something that is super scientific, a very informal designed web page might not be appropriate. So you do kind of have to think about what's appropriate for your issue, for your and for your audience. So I want you to take a minute and just kind of think about that. And then I want to talk more about what I mean by including other perspectives. We'll do some brainstorming for this also kind of as we go, but what it typically looks like to have other perspectives addressed in your essay is that you have what's called counter arguments and refutations. When you identify another perspective, another idea, another concern, another cause for a problem, another solution, I didn't include it, but another effect, it's considered a counter argument. And in order to write a good argument, you have to be involved in a conversation. So there must be a conversation with varying ideas. There's no such thing as you're making an argument and there's nothing else involved in the conversation. You have to figure out where the conversation is taking place. So for instance, there may not be like a for or against, or a right or a wrong. It may be over what the causes are or what the possible solutions are. For instance, if you are writing about, and I've used this before, writing about domestic violence, the conversation is not going to be for or against. People aren't going to be on the internet arguing about whether or not domestic violence is a good thing. They will be arguing about what the causes are, what the solutions are. That's going to be kind of where the nature of that conversation is. So you have to figure out where the conversation is. It may not be for or against, but there are counter arguments if you are writing an argument. The refutation is how you're going to address it, how you're going to say, many people believe this, or this group of people believe this, or this scholar says this, however, and how you're going to explain how you see it differently. And with that, you are ready-ish to move on to write your thought letter. Again, I hardly expect you at this point to have everything figured out. That's why you're now taking what you have from this presentation and moving it into the next activity, which will ask you just to write out more formally what your ideas might be and to get some feedback on that.